He never could have imagined the catastrophe that would follow his simple act of kindness. The sun beat down relentlessly on the remote farmstead as the weary traveler approached. Her robes were tattered, her skin burned from hours under the merciless rays. Stumbling, she gazed around in desperation, searching for any sign of life. Then, through the shimmering haze, she spotted a humble thatched dwelling, her last hope. With the last of his strength, the old farmer hauled buckets of water from the well, the muscles in his weathered arms straining with the effort. Pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow, he froze at the sight of the ragged figure coming towards him. Her face was obscured by a dark veil, but he could see the desperation in her movements. "Please," the stranger croaked, voice barely above a whisper, "I need water." Without a moment's hesitation, the farmer hurried to the well, dipping a cup into the cool, clear liquid. Holding it out to her, he watched as she grasped it with trembling hands and drank deeply, the water spilling down her chin. When at last she was satisfied, she mumbled a quiet thank you and continued on her way, disappearing into the shimmering distance. Puzzled but satisfied that he had done a good deed, the farmer returned to his chores, unaware of the dramatic events his simple act of kindness had just set in motion. By the time the first golden rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the once peaceful farmstead had been transformed into a scene of chaos. The farmer awoke with a start to the thunderous sound of hooves pounding the earth. Rushing to the door, he peered out in bewilderment as 100 mounted samurai in gleaming armor came riding up the dirt track, swords and spears glinting in the morning light. Trembling, the farmer watched as the riders surrounded his humble home, their faces grim and determined. A tall, imposing figure dismounted and strode towards him, his robes marked with the insignia of a powerful clan. The farmer's heart raced as the man fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Where is she?" the samurai demanded, his voice laced with barely contained fury. The farmer blinked in confusion. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. The samurai's eyes narrowed. "Do not play games with me, farmer. The Princess Akiko has disappeared, and our scouts tracked her to this location. Now, tell me where she is, or face the consequences." Princess Akiko? The farmer's mind whirled as he tried to make sense of the situation. The ragged traveler he had helped, could she really have been the missing princess? Surely not, but the samurai's words left no room for doubt. Sensing the farmer's bewilderment, the samurai's expression darkened. "Very well. If you will not cooperate, then we shall have to search your home ourselves." Before the farmer could protest, the samurai barked a command, and the riders surged forward, surrounding the modest farmhouse.
The farmer watched in horror as they ransacked his humble abode, overturning furniture and ripping open every drawer and cupboard. As the samurai tore through his belongings, the farmer's mind raced. What would they do to him if they found no trace of the princess? His heart pounded in his chest, and he trembled, fearing the worst. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the search came to an end. The samurai regrouped, their faces grim. "She is not here," the leader growled, his frustration evident. "But mark my words, farmer, if you are harboring the princess, we will find her, and you will pay dearly for your deceit." With that, the samurai turned and mounted their horses, the thunderous sound of hooves once again filling the air as they rode off, leaving the terrified farmer standing amidst the ruins of his home, wondering what fate now awaited him. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the farmer's mind whirled with 1,000 anxious thoughts. What had he done to deserve this? He was just a simple man trying to eke out a living on his humble plot of land. How could a single act of kindness have led to such a calamity? He paced the floor of his ransacked home, the events of the morning replaying in his mind. The ragged traveler, the desperate plea for water, the sudden appearance of the samurai, it all seemed like a terrible dream. But the shattered furniture and overturned belongings were a stark reminder that this was no nightmare, but a harsh reality. Sinking into a chair, the farmer buried his head in his hands, his weary mind trying to make sense of it all. What would become of him now? Would the samurai return, demanding answers he could not provide? The thought sent a chill down his spine, and he shuddered, his entire body trembling with fear. As the hours ticked by, the farmer's anxiety only grew. He dared not leave the safety of his home, fearful that the samurai would return at any moment. The once peaceful farmstead now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of the danger that loomed just beyond its walls. Night fell, but the farmer found no solace in the darkness. He paced the floorboards, straining his ears for any sound that might signal the return of the riders. Every creak and groan of the old house sent his heart racing, and he found himself jumping at the slightest provocation. Finally, as the first faint hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the farmer could bear the suspense no longer. Steeling his nerves, he stepped outside, his eyes scanning the empty fields for any sign of movement. The land was eerily silent, save for the gentle rustling of the wind through the crops. Exhaling a shaky breath, the farmer turned to go back inside, his mind already racing with plans for his next course of action. But as he reached for the door, a movement in the distance caught his eye.
Squinting against the rising sun, he spotted a lone figure, garbed in tattered robes, making its way towards the farmstead. The farmer's heart leapt into his throat as he recognized the weary traveler from the day before. Surely she couldn't be the princess they were searching for, could she? But as the figure drew closer, the farmer could see the distinct insignia of the rival clan emblazoned on the worn fabric. Swallowing hard, the farmer watched in silent trepidation as the traveler approached, her steps slow and unsteady. She paused at the edge of the field, her gaze sweeping across the farmstead, and the farmer felt a chill run down his spine. Had the samurai returned, perhaps in disguise, to enact their promised retribution? But as the figure drew closer, the farmer caught a glimpse of her face, and his breath caught in his throat. For there, in the morning light, he saw the unmistakable features of the missing princess, the very woman he had helped just the day before, unaware of her true identity. The weary traveler drew closer, her worn robes fluttering in the gentle breeze. As she approached, the farmer's heart raced, his mind reeling with the implications of this chance encounter. Could this truly be the missing Princess Akiko, the very woman he had unwittingly helped the day before? Steeling his nerves, the farmer stepped forward, his eyes locking with those of the approaching figure. To his shock, the veil parted, revealing the delicate, almost ethereal features of the princess. There was no mistaking those piercing eyes and refined bone structure. This was undoubtedly the woman the samurai had been searching for. Before the farmer could utter a word, the princess raised a trembling hand, her lips moving in a silent plea. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you must help me." The farmer's mind whirled. Help her? After the destruction the samurai had wrought upon his home, how could he possibly defy them and their powerful clan? The consequences of such an action were too terrifying to contemplate. Yet, as he gazed into the princess's eyes, he saw a profound desperation, a silent cry for aid that tugged at his very soul. Swallowing hard, the farmer glanced nervously over his shoulder, half expecting to see the gleaming armor of the samurai riders once more. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The princess's eyes widened with relief, and she stepped closer, her trembling fingers grasping the farmer's worn sleeve. "I must get away from here, from the samurai who pursue me. They mean to kill me." The farmer's blood ran cold. Kill the princess? The thought was almost unfathomable. "But why?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What have you done?" The princess shook her head, her eyes darting about nervously. "I have done nothing wrong. But my brother—" Her voice trailed off, a look of utter anguish crossing her delicate features. Before the farmer could press her further, a thunderous sound echoed across the fields, and his heart sank. The unmistakable pounding of hooves. The samurai had returned. Panic seized the farmer, and he grabbed the princess's arm, pulling her towards the safety of his humble home. "Quick, you must hide," he hissed, his eyes darting about frantically. But as they reached the doorway, a movement in the distance caught the princess's eye, and she froze, her face draining of color. "No," she whispered, her voice laced with pure terror. "It's too late." The farmer followed her gaze and felt his stomach lurch. Emerging from the shimmering haze were the unmistakable forms of the samurai riders, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they surged forward, their swords and spears glinting in the morning light. Trembling, the farmer ushered the princess inside, slamming the door shut behind them. His mind raced, desperately searching for a hiding place, a means of escape, anything that might save them from the impending wrath of the samurai. But as he led the princess deeper into the house, a sudden, sickening realization dawned on him. The samurai had not returned alone. Trailing behind the riders, barely visible through the haze, was a figure on horseback, its robes marked with the insignia of the rival clan. The farmer's breath caught in his throat, and he froze, his eyes widening in horrified understanding. "No," he whispered, the color draining from his face. "It can't be." The princess seemed to sense his sudden terror, and she gripped his arm, her eyes pleading. "What is it?
What have you seen?" The farmer swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he spoke. The princess. Your brother. He's with them." The princess's face crumbled, and she let out a strangled sob, her knees buckling beneath her. "Impossible," she gasped, her fingers clawing at the farmer's sleeve. "My brother would never betray me. Not like this." The farmer caught her, gently lowering her to the floor as she wept bitterly. His own heart was heavy with the weight of this revelation, the implications of what it meant for the princess and her fate. As the thunderous hooves grew closer, the farmer knew they had precious little time. Quickly he scanned the room, his gaze falling on a small, cramped cellar hatch hidden beneath a threadbare rug. "Come," he whispered, tugging the princess to her feet. "We must hide, quickly." Guiding her to the hatch, the farmer lifted the heavy wooden door, revealing a narrow, dark staircase leading down into the earth. Without hesitation, he ushered the princess inside, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment. "Stay here, and do not make a sound," he murmured. "I will try to send them away." The princess's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded, her trembling fingers clutching the farmer's hand. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible.
With a heavy heart, the farmer closed the hatch, plunging the princess into darkness. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he turned and strode towards the front door, bracing himself for the confrontation that was to come. As he stepped outside, the thundering hooves grew louder, and the farmer's heart pounded in his chest. The samurai riders had reached the edge of the farmstead, their horses snorting and pawing the ground, their riders tense and alert. At their head was the tall, imposing figure of the samurai leader, his eyes narrowed with barely contained fury. "Farmer," he growled, his voice laced with menace. "Where is the princess?" The farmer swallowed hard, his palms sweating. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, desperately hoping his lie would be convincing. But the samurai's eyes only darkened, and he took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Do not toy with me, fool. We know she is here, and we will not leave until she is found." The farmer's mind raced, searching for a way to stall, to buy the princess time to escape. But as his gaze shifted, he caught sight of the figure on horseback, the familiar insignia of the rival clan emblazoned on its robes. His heart sank as he recognized the man, the princess's own brother, the one who had apparently betrayed her. A wave of nausea washed over him, and he felt his legs tremble beneath him. The samurai leader followed the farmer's gaze, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Ah, I see you have noticed our honored guest," he sneered, gesturing towards the figure on horseback. The princess's brother dismounted, his robes sweeping the ground as he approached the farmer, his expression unreadable. "Where is she, farmer?" he demanded, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. The farmer's mouth felt dry, and he struggled to find the words. I don't know," he stammered, his eyes darting about nervously. The princess's brother narrowed his eyes, his gaze piercing the farmer's very soul. "I think you do," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And if you value your life, you will tell me where she is." The farmer's heart raced, his mind a whirlwind of fear and indecision. He knew he couldn't betray the princess, but the thought of the consequences was too terrifying to bear. Glancing frantically around, he desperately searched for a way out, a means of escape. But as his eyes landed on the cellar hatch, a sudden, horrifying realization dawned on him. The princess was still hidden there, vulnerable and exposed, and if the samurai or her own brother discovered her. The farmer's blood ran cold, and he felt his legs give way as the true weight of the situation crashed down upon him. Trembling, he turned to face the approaching figures, his voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know where she is, but I know you won't leave until you find her. And He paused, his heart pounding in his chest. "I can't let you."
The samurai leader's eyes narrowed, and he drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the morning light. "Then you have sealed your fate, farmer," he growled, his voice dripping with menace. As the blade arced through the air, the farmer squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the end. But the blow never came. Instead, a sudden, agonized scream pierced the air, shattering the tense silence. The farmer's eyes flew open, and he froze, his breath catching in his throat.
For there, standing amidst the chaos, was the princess, her face twisted in a look of pure horror, her hands clutching at the dagger that protruded from her chest. Here is a new 1,600-word chapter continuing the story with a shocking plot twist. The farmer watched in stunned horror as the princess crumpled to the ground, the dagger still protruding from her chest. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as he stared at her motionless form, his mind reeling with the awful realization of what had just happened. The samurai leader stood frozen, his sword still raised, a look of shock and confusion etched on his face. The princess's brother, his robes billowing in the breeze, slowly lowered his outstretched arm, his eyes narrowed with a chilling sense of triumph. "No," the farmer breathed, his voice barely audible. He rushed to the princess's side, dropping to his knees and cradling her in his arms. Her eyes were open, but their vibrant spark had been extinguished, replaced by the vacant stare of the dead. "What have you done?" the farmer cried, his gaze darting accusingly between the samurai leader and the princess's brother. "How could you?" The princess's brother stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I did what was necessary," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She was a threat to the clan, a weak-willed fool who would have jeopardized everything we've worked for." The farmer's stomach churned with revulsion. "She was your own sister!" he spat, his hands trembling as he gently closed the princess's eyes. "How could you betray her like this?" The brother shrugged, his lips curling into a cold, merciless smile. "Blood means nothing to me, not when the future of our clan is at stake. The princess was a liability, and I eliminated her before she could cause any more damage." The farmer felt bile rise in his throat, the weight of the princess's lifeless body in his arms filling him with a sense of overwhelming despair. "You're a monster," he whispered, his voice thick with grief and anger. The samurai leader, who had until now remained silent, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "If the princess is dead, then why did you lead us here, brother?" he demanded, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. The princess's brother turned to face the samurai, his expression hardening. "I had to be sure she was eliminated," he replied, his voice laced with barely contempt. "I knew the farmer had helped her, and I needed to ensure he would not harbor her."
The farmer's heart sank as he realized the true horror of the situation. The princess's own brother had betrayed her, and now he stood poised to deliver the final blow. Clutching the princess's lifeless body closer to his chest, the farmer braced himself for the inevitable. But just as the samurai leader raised his sword, a sudden movement from the cellar hatch caught the farmer's eye. To his astonishment, a small, slender figure emerged, their robes billowing in the wind. It was the princess, alive and trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "No," she cried, her voice cracking with anguish. "This cannot be!" The samurai leader and the princess's brother whirled around, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. "Impossible!" the brother snarled, his hand instinctively reaching for his own sword. The farmer's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. He had hidden the princess in the cellar, hoping to keep her safe, but somehow, against all odds, she had escaped. And now, with the true princess revealed, the deadly game of deception was about to take an even more sinister turn. "Guards, seize her!" the princess's brother bellowed, his voice laced with fury. The samurai riders surged forward, their swords drawn and their faces grim. But the princess, her eyes wild with desperation, darted away, her tattered robes fluttering behind her as she ran. The farmer watched in horror as the riders gave chase, their horses thundering across the field. The princess ran with all her might, but she was no match for the seasoned warriors on their powerful mounts. In a matter of moments, they had caught up to her, surrounding her in a tight circle. The princess's brother approached, his sword drawn, a twisted smile on his lips. "End of the line, dear sister," he sneered, raising his blade. But as the brother prepared to deliver the fatal blow, a deafening crack split the air, and the princess's brother suddenly staggered, his sword clattering to the ground as he clutched his wounded shoulder. The farmer blinked in disbelief, his gaze drawn to a small hunched figure standing near the cellar hatch, a smoking pistol in their hand. It was the princess, her face contorted with fury, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "You will not touch me, you bastard!" she screamed, her voice laced with raw emotion. The samurai leader and his men froze, their eyes wide with shock and confusion.
The princess's brother, his face twisted with pain and rage, glared at his sister, his hand clutching the bloody wound. "You," he gasped, his words dripping with venom. The princess's grip on the pistol tightened, her finger poised on the trigger. "I will not let you take my life," she spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Not after you stole my father's throne and murdered my mother." The farmer's mind reeled as the princess's words sank in.
Murdered her mother? Stolen the throne? Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and the true nature of the conflict became painfully clear. The princess's brother was not merely a rival, but a ruthless usurper, a man who had betrayed his own family in his quest for power. And the princess, in her desperation to escape his clutches, had been forced to resort to unthinkable measures to protect herself. The samurai leader, his brow furrowed with confusion, stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture of caution. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice laced with uncertainty. The princess's brother, his face contorted with pain and rage, turned to face the samurai. This traitor," he spat, "has conspired against the rightful ruler of our clan. She murdered our mother and seeks to steal my throne." The princess let out a bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "Lies, all of it," she cried. "It was you, brother, who orchestrated our mother's death, and you who seized the throne by force. I am the true heir, the rightful ruler of our clan." The samurai leader's eyes widened, and he glanced back and forth between the two siblings, his mind clearly grappling with the gravity of the revelations. "If this is true," he said slowly, "then you, princess, are the one we should have been seeking all along." The princess's brother let out a growl of frustration, his good hand reaching for his sword. "You fools," he spat, "I am the rightful ruler, and I will not let some sniveling brat take what is mine." In a flash, the brother lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air. But the princess was quicker, her finger squeezing the trigger of the pistol. The deafening crack echoed across the field, and the brother staggered, his sword clattering to the ground as he crumpled to his knees, blood pouring from a wound in his chest. The samurai leader and his men stood frozen, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and horror. The princess, her hands shaking, kept the pistol trained on her brother, her eyes narrowed with a fierce determination. "It's over, brother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've lost." The brother gasped, his face contorted with pain and fury. This isn't over," he choked, his eyes burning with a defiant hatred. "I'll see you dead before I let you take what is mine." The princess's grip tightened on the pistol, her finger poised on the trigger. "So be it," she said, her voice steady and resolute. But before she could pull the trigger, a commotion erupted from the direction of the farmhouse. The farmer, who had been watching the unfolding drama in stunned silence, suddenly let out a cry of alarm. "The house!" he shouted, his eyes wide with panic. The princess and the samurai whirled around, their attention diverted by the billowing smoke and the crackling of flames. In the chaos, the wounded brother managed to gather what little strength he had left and began to crawl away, his eyes glinting with a twisted sense of triumph. "No!" the princess cried, turning her weapon back towards her brother, but she was too late. The brother had disappeared into the shimmering haze, leaving the princess and the samurai to confront the rapidly growing fire that threatened to consume the farmer's humble home. The farmer, his face etched with horror, rushed towards the burning building, desperate to save what he could. The samurai leader and his men quickly followed, their efforts focused on extinguishing the blaze before it spread. But as they fought to control the fire, a sinking realization dawned on the farmer. The princess, in her haste to escape, had left the cellar hatch open, and the flames were now licking at the wooden steps, quickly spreading downwards. "The cellar!" the farmer cried, his voice laced with panic. "Someone must seal it off before the fire reaches it." The samurai leader's eyes widened with understanding, and he barked a command to his men, who immediately rushed to the cellar hatch, their faces grim with determination. But as the farmer watched, a sudden chilling thought struck him. If the cellar hatch was sealed, and the fire continued to spread, then the person trapped inside would have no way to escape. The farmer's blood ran cold, and he turned to the princess, his eyes pleading. "The cellar," he gasped, his voice trembling. "Someone is still inside." The princess's face drained of color, and she stared at the farmer, her eyes wide with horror. In that moment, the farmer knew the terrible truth.
the person trapped within the burning cellar was none other than the princess herself. Here is a new 1,600-word chapter with a shocking plot twist. The farmer's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the smoke billowing from the cellar hatch. The princess, trapped inside, was running out of time. He had to do something, but what? "We have to get her out of there," the farmer cried, his voice cracking with desperation. He rushed towards the hatch, but the samurai leader grabbed his arm, holding him back. "It's too dangerous," the samurai said, his face etched with concern. "The fire is spreading too quickly. We need to focus on containing the blaze before it consumes the entire house." The farmer's eyes darted between the hatch and the raging fire, his mind racing. He couldn't just abandon the princess to her fate, but the samurai was right. The flames were growing stronger by the second, and if they didn't act fast, the whole farmhouse would be lost. Suddenly, a movement in the corner of his eye caught the farmer's attention. Turning, he watched in horror as the wounded brother, his face twisted with a maniacal grin, limped towards the cellar hatch, a lit torch in his hand. "No!" the farmer shouted, lunging forward, but the brother was too quick.
With a swift motion, he tossed the torch into the open hatch, and the farmer's heart sank as he heard the princess's terrified scream echoing from below. The samurai leader reacted instantly, barking orders to his men, who surged forward, their swords drawn. But the brother, his face a mask of pure malice, dodged their attacks, his laughter ringing out across the field. "You fools," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can stop me? The throne is mine, and I'll burn this whole place to the ground before I let that wretched girl take it from me." The farmer stood frozen, his mind reeling with the realization that the princess was now trapped in a blazing inferno, her fate sealed by her own brother's twisted desire for power. He had to do something, but what? The samurai were fully engaged with the brother, their swords clashing as they tried to subdue the deranged man. Suddenly, a glimmer of hope appeared in the farmer's vision, a small, sturdy-looking ladder propped against the side of the house. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and rushed to the cellar hatch, his muscles straining as he lowered the ladder into the dark opening. "Princess," he called out, his voice thick with urgency. "Can you hear me? Climb up, quickly! The fire is spreading!" The only response was the crackle of the flames and the roar of the blaze. The farmer's heart sank, and he peered into the hatch, trying to catch a glimpse of the princess, but the smoke billowing from below obscured his vision. Turning his attention back to the battle, the farmer watched in horror as the brother managed to break free from the samurai's grasp, his clothes singed and his face twisted with a savage grin. "Fools," he spat, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You'll all burn with her." With that, the brother lunged towards the cellar hatch, his hands outstretched, intent on sealing the princess's fate. The farmer reacted instantly, throwing himself in front of the hatch, his body shielding the only means of escape. The brother's eyes narrowed, and he let out a guttural roar. "Get out of my way, you worthless peasant," he snarled, his hands clawing at the farmer's clothes. The farmer stood firm, his heart pounding in his chest. "I won't let you kill her," he growled, his voice laced with determination. The brother's face contorted with rage, and he drew his sword, the steel glinting in the flickering light of the flames. "Then you will die with her," he screamed, raising the blade. The farmer closed his eyes, bracing himself for the end. But just as the brother's sword came crashing down, a sudden blinding light filled the air, accompanied by a deafening explosion. The farmer was thrown backwards, his ears ringing and his vision blurred. As the dust settled, he blinked, his eyes widening in disbelief at the scene before him. The brother lay on the ground, his body motionless, his sword nowhere to be seen.
The samurai leader and his men were staring in stunned silence, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and horror. And there, standing amidst the chaos, was the princess, her robes singed and her hair disheveled, but her eyes shining with a fierce determination. In her hand she held a strange cylindrical device, its surface glowing with an eerie bluish light. The farmer's heart raced as he realized what it was, a weapon unlike anything he had ever seen before. The princess's gaze swept across the field, and when it landed on the unmoving form of her brother, a flicker of something akin to regret crossed her features. But just as quickly, it was replaced by a steely resolve. "It's over," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "The throne is mine, and I will not let any of you stand in my way." The samurai leader stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Princess," he said, his tone cautious. "What is the meaning of this? What have you done?" The princess's grip on the strange device tightened, and the farmer felt a chill run down his spine. "I've done what was necessary," she said, her eyes narrowing. "My brother was a threat, not just to me, but to our entire clan. And I will not let his lust for power destroy us all." The samurai leader's brow furrowed, and he glanced towards the still form of the brother, his expression unreadable. "So you have killed him," he said, his voice low and measured. The princess shook her head, a wry smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "No," she said, her gaze sweeping over the samurai and the farmer. "I've done something much worse." Before either the farmer or the samurai could react, the princess raised the strange device and pressed a series of buttons along its surface. The farmer watched in horrified fascination as a faint, pulsing hum filled the air, growing steadily louder. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the farmer's eyes widened in terror as he realized what was happening. The device the princess held was not a weapon, but something far more devastating. A trigger for some unseen force that was about to be unleashed. The samurai leader seemed to sense the impending danger as well, and he shouted a frantic order to his men, who immediately began to retreat, their horses rearing and whinnying with fear. But the farmer, frozen in place by a mixture of awe and terror, could only stare at the princess, his mind reeling with the implications of what she had done. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rumbling of the earth. The princess's eyes locked with his, and he was struck by the sheer intensity of her gaze. "I'm taking back what is rightfully mine," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "And this time, no one will stand in my way." As the ground beneath their feet continued to shudder and groan, the farmer felt a sense of dread wash over him.
He had thought the princess was a victim, a pawn in a game of political intrigue. But now, he realized with a sinking heart, she was the true master of this deadly game, willing to go to any lengths to claim her prize. And as the world around them began to crumble, the farmer knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Here is a new 1,600-word chapter continuing the story with a shocking plot twist. The earth shook violently beneath their feet, and the farmer felt his heart racing as he watched the ground begin to split open, jagged cracks snaking across the once tranquil landscape. The princess stood there, her expression unwavering, her finger poised on the strange device that had triggered this cataclysmic event. Beside him, the samurai leader and his men scrambled to regain their footing, their horses whinnying in terror as they reared back, their eyes wild with fear. The farmer could see the panic etched on their faces, and he knew they were just as bewildered and terrified as he was by the sheer magnitude of what was unfolding before them. "What have you done?" the farmer cried, his voice barely audible over the deafening rumble of the earth. The princess's gaze shifted to him, her eyes cold and calculating. "I've taken back what is rightfully mine," she said, her tone laced with a chilling sense of triumph. "And this time, no one will stop me." The farmer's mind reeled as he tried to make sense of her words. This wasn't the same princess he had sheltered and protected. This was a ruthless, cunning individual, willing to unleash untold destruction to achieve her goals. "But the people," the farmer stammered, his eyes darting around the rapidly crumbling landscape. "Your own people, they'll be caught in the—" The princess's expression darkened, and she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Casualties are unavoidable," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "If they stand in my way, they will be swept aside, just like my brother." The farmer's stomach lurched as he realized the true nature of the princess's plan. She wasn't simply reclaiming her throne. She was willing to annihilate anyone and everyone who dared to oppose her, even if it meant the destruction of her own kingdom. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the chaos, and the farmer turned to see the wounded brother, his face twisted with agony, dragging himself across the ground. "Sister," he gasped, his voice barely audible. How could you?" The princess's eyes narrowed, and she raised the device, her finger hovering over the glowing buttons. "You brought this upon yourself, brother," she said, her tone laced with contempt. "You were a threat,
and I will not allow you to jeopardize my rightful claim to the throne." Before the farmer could react, the princess pressed down on the device, and the earth erupted in a deafening explosion.
The ground split open, and the farmer watched in horror as the brother's body was swallowed by the gaping chasm, his final agonized scream echoing across the devastated landscape. The samurai leader and his men stared in stunned silence, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and disbelief. The farmer felt sick to his stomach, the realization of what the princess had done weighing heavily on his conscience. You've killed him," the farmer whispered, his voice trembling. The princess's expression remained impassive, her grip on the device unwavering. "He was a necessary sacrifice," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Now there is nothing standing in my way." The farmer opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat as a sudden ominous rumbling filled the air. Glancing around, he watched in horror as massive metallic structures began to emerge from the earth, their towering forms casting long shadows across the shattered landscape. The samurai leader's eyes widened, and he took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. "What sorcery is this?" he breathed, his voice laced with dread. The princess's lips curled into a cold, triumphant smile. "Not sorcery, foolish man," she said. "Technology, the true power that will secure my reign." As the enormous mechanical constructs continued to rise from the ground, the farmer felt a chill run down his spine. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, their surfaces gleaming with a menacing, otherworldly beauty. And in the center of each one, he could make out the distinct insignia of the princess's clan, a symbol of her undisputed authority. "What are those things?" the farmer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The princess's gaze swept across the field, her eyes gleaming with a sense of power and control. "Weapons," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. "Unstoppable, indestructible weapons that will crush any who dare to challenge my rule." The samurai leader's expression hardened, and he drew his sword, his men following suit. "Then we have no choice but to fight," he growled, his eyes narrowed with determination. But the princess merely laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent a shiver down the farmer's spine. "Fight," she scoffed. "You fool. Your swords and your horses are no match for the might of my armored divisions." As if to punctuate her words, the massive metallic constructs began to move, their ponderous steps shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The farmer watched in awe and terror as they turned towards the gathered samurai, their hulking forms dwarfing the mounted warriors. "Fall back," the samurai leader shouted, his voice laced with panic. "Fall back, now!" The samurai turned and fled, their horses galloping across the shattered terrain as the towering machines advanced, their weapon systems humming to life. The farmer watched, frozen in place, as the samurai were engulfed in a blaze of fire and smoke, their anguished cries echoing across the devastated landscape. The princess stood amidst the chaos, her expression one of cold, calculated triumph. "See how easily they fall," she said, her voice tinged with a note of perverse satisfaction. "This is the power that will secure my reign." The farmer felt a knot of dread form in the pit of his stomach as he realized the true scale of the princess's ambition. She wasn't simply reclaiming her throne. She was poised to unleash a devastating, unstoppable force that would crush any and all opposition, no matter the cost. As the last of the samurai disappeared from view, consumed by the relentless onslaught of the mechanical behemoths, the farmer turned to the princess, his eyes pleading. "Please," he begged, "think of your people. Think of the lives that will be lost if you—" The princess's gaze hardened, and she raised her hand, silencing him with a sharp gesture. "My people will learn to accept my rule," she said, her voice cold and unforgiving. "Those who resist will be destroyed, for I will tolerate no dissent." The farmer felt his heart sink, the weight of the princess's words crushing him.
He had thought he was helping a victim, a pawn in a twisted game of power. But now, he realized with sickening clarity, the princess was the true master of this game, a ruthless, calculating individual who would stop at nothing to claim her rightful place on the throne. "You can't do this," the farmer said, his voice laced with desperation. "There has to be another way, a peaceful way to—" But the princess cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "There is no other way," she said, her eyes narrowing with a chilling resolve. "I will take what is mine, no matter the cost." The farmer's gaze darted around the devastated landscape, his mind reeling with the implications of what the princess was about to unleash. Thousands, perhaps millions, would perish in the ensuing onslaught, innocent lives sacrificed at the altar of the princess's ambition. He had to stop her, had to find a way to reason with her, to appeal to the humanity he knew must still exist within her. But as he opened his mouth to speak, a sudden piercing sound filled the air, and the farmer's blood ran cold. Turning, he watched in horror as the massive metallic constructs began to move, their weapon systems powering up with a menacing hum. And at their center, the princess stood, her finger poised on the strange device, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "Goodbye, farmer," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've served your purpose." Before the farmer could react, the princess pressed down on the device, and the world around him erupted in a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar.
The last thing he saw was the princess's face, her expression one of cold, calculating triumph, as the ground beneath his feet crumbled, and the darkness swept him away.
It haunts me, knowing that I couldn't save them, that I had to save myself. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I had no idea where I was going, just that I had to get as far away from that place as possible. And then, finally, I saw it, a small village, its humble dwellings nestled in the valley below. I stumbled into the village, my clothes tattered and my face streaked with dirt and tears. The villagers looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern, and I knew I had to warn them, to tell them what was coming. "You have to leave," I cried, my voice hoarse with emotion. "The princess, she's unleashed some kind of unstoppable army. They'll destroy everything in their path." The villagers stared at me, their expressions a mix of disbelief and fear. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the reluctance to believe the wild tale of a ragged, disheveled stranger. But then, in the distance, a deep, rumbling sound began to build, growing louder with each passing moment. The villagers turned, their faces paling as they caught sight of the massive, metallic forms cresting the horizon. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with urgency. "Run, before it's too late!" The villagers needed no further prompting. They scattered, their voices raised in panicked cries as they fled towards the surrounding hills and forests. I watched, my heart pounding, as the mechanical behemoths drew closer, their weapon systems powering up with a menacing hum. I knew I had to get out of there too. There was nothing I could do to stop them, nothing I could do to save the village. So I turned and ran, my legs pumping as I desperately tried to put as much distance between myself and the approaching onslaught. I could hear the deafening roar of the machines as they unleashed their devastating firepower, the ground shaking beneath my feet as the village was consumed in a blaze of smoke and flame. It was a sound I'll never forget, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Finally, I collapsed, gasping for air, my eyes burning with tears of grief and terror. I had escaped the princess's wrath, but at what cost? How many innocent lives had been lost because of my actions, because of my decision to help her? As I lay there, the weight of it all came crashing down on me. I had thought I was doing the right thing, that I was helping an oppressed and desperate princess reclaim her rightful place. But in the end, I had only succeeded in unleashing a force of pure, unbridled destruction upon the world. The princess, in her quest for power, had become a monster. She had sacrificed everything, even her own brother, to achieve her goals. And now, she was poised to bring ruin to countless lives, all in the name of her twisted ambition. I don't know how long I lay there, my mind reeling with the enormity of what had happened.
Time seemed to lose all meaning as I grappled with the overwhelming sense of guilt and despair. If only I had done things differently. If only I had seen the true nature of the princess's character before it was too late. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the scorched earth, I knew I couldn't dwell on what-ifs and could-have-beens. I had to find a way to stop the princess, to find a way to undo the devastation she had wrought. With renewed determination, I pushed myself to my feet, my muscles aching from the long, grueling run. I had to warn others, to rally whatever forces I could to stand against the princess's unstoppable army. It was a daunting task, but I couldn't give up, not when so many lives were at stake. As I made my way through the darkening countryside, I couldn't help but wonder about the fate of the farmer's humble home, the place where this whole nightmare had begun. Had the princess's machines reduced it to rubble, just as they had the village? And what of the princess herself? Had she continued her relentless march of destruction, or was there some glimmer of hope that she could be stopped? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew I couldn't dwell on them now. I had to focus on the task at hand, on finding a way to rally the people and mount a resistance against the princess's tyrannical rule. It won't be easy, I know that. The princess has unleashed a force of unimaginable power, and she seems willing to stop at nothing to achieve her goals. But I can't give up. Not when so much is at stake. I owe it to the people I couldn't save, to the innocent lives that were lost because of my actions, to do everything in my power to stop her. So I'll keep moving forward, gathering whatever allies I can find, and I'll do whatever it takes to confront the princess and put an end to her reign of terror. It's a daunting task, but I have to try. Too much is at stake to do anything less. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe I'll succeed in rallying the people and finding a way to defeat the princess's army. Or maybe I'll fail, and the princess will continue her relentless march of destruction, crushing everything in her path. But one thing I do know for sure, I can't give up. Not now, not ever. I have to try, for the sake of all those who have suffered because of my actions. It's the only way I can make amends, the only way I can try to make things right. So that's where I'm at, my friend. I'm out there, fighting the good fight, trying to find a way to stop the princess and undo the devastation she's caused. It's not going to be easy, but I have to try. For the sake of all those innocent lives, I have to keep going, no matter what. Wish me luck, will you? I'm gonna need it.